The moment the guard raised his rifle, the world sharpened into brutal focus. A child's eyes went wide. Sunlight flashed off cold steel. The trigger clicked, a sound so soft it stole the breath from the air. Time held its breath. Then, an engine's roar tore through the silence. Traoré's convoy stormed onto the site, dust flying in its wake. He stepped out, dressed in camouflage, every inch a man unafraid, his voice cut like iron. "Put it down." Everything stopped. Antoine, the local liaison in a faded blue shirt, watched, heart thundering in his chest. Around them, women bowed beneath heavy baskets. Children clawed at rock with bleeding hands, each scoop a desperate bid for survival. This was only the beginning. Traoré advanced, steady and unshaken. The guard's arms trembled, his grip faltered. Traoré's gaze locked on him, calm, unwavering. The guard broke. The rifle sagged to his side. The mine froze. Hammers hovered mid-swing. Dust hung in the air, thick as grief. Somewhere in the distance, metal struck stone, one last echo of a broken system. Antoine stepped forward, his voice hushed. "Sir, they've been digging children from dawn till dusk. No food, no rest." Traoré nodded grimly. He scanned the pit, an open wound carved into red earth. Dozens of small bodies bent beneath oversized loads, tiny fingers torn raw. Empty company sacks lay discarded nearby, their logos promising riches but delivering dust. Traoré pulled off his helmet, raised a gloved hand. "Gather your men," he ordered. The guard hesitated, then tugged at his uniform in a gesture that was part salute, part surrender. Traoré turned to Antoine. "Find their supervisors. I want names, faces, ranks." Antoine's throat bobbed. He nodded, then ran toward the makeshift offices gouged into the cliffside. Alone now, Traoré gazed over the pit. This was what had become of the nation's promise. Dreams buried beneath greed and stone. He knelt, fingers brushing a child's bloodied handprint on the rock. A woman's wail rose from below, raw and endless. It twisted in his gut. He stood tall, not broken, not helpless. Resolute. Antoine returned, breathless, a crumpled paper in his hand. "Jean-Claude Belgium, Wilhelm Fischer, dozens more." Traoré scanned the list. Names meant nothing unless law bound them. He folded the sheet and nodded to Colonel Cabor. The colonel stepped from the lead vehicle, carrying legal documents and a satchel of toggle locks. They walked the perimeter, sealing exits. The consortium's guards stared, stunned, rifles limp at their sides, suddenly meaningless. Under the midday sun, Traoré summoned the workers one by one. Mothers rose first. Children followed, eyes sunken and fearful. They lined up along the rim of the shaft, clutching what little they had. Traoré offered water. Some drank, some only stared. He knelt before a boy no older than Antoine had once been. "You're safe now," he said softly. The child blinked. Dust and tears streaked down his cheeks. Above them, the European supervisors cowered behind a chain-link fence. Their suits looked obscene among the sweat and scars. Traoré approached, holding out the order. "You will cease operations immediately. You will stand trial under Borin Bay law." Fischer paled. "Mr. President, this is Traoré." Traoré didn't flinch. "This is justice." He turned to Cabor. "Escort them. Confiscate every file." The colonel nodded, hand grazing his holster. Guards surged forward. The men behind the fence scrambled, shouting protests that dissolved into dust. Antoine stepped beside Traoré, hand on his shoulder. "What now, sir?" Traoré's eyes scanned the workers silhouetted against the harsh sky. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. And we show the world what a nation forged in courage can achieve." He turned back to the crowd. "Come, let us take you home." The convoy reformed. Engines rumbled to life. Traoré cast one last glance at the broken shaft, now a place of reckoning. Antoine climbed in beside him, resolve flickering in his eyes. The red dust settled, revealing footprints, small, fragile, marching away from bondage toward hope. Later, Traoré sat on a canvas cot near the edge of the pit. A nurse crouched beside a child, pressing a cloth to his bleeding forehead. The boy whimpered, eyes fluttering shut. Traoré removed his helmet. Sunlight gleamed off his brow. His gaze found the guard, now standing off to the side, rifle lowered and useless. "Explain," Traoré said, voice low, fingers clenched around the cot strap. The guard stammered. "They said it was safe. They said we'd be paid. Federal. Protected." Antoine rose, jaw clenched, his shirt stained with dust and sweat. "They lied," he snapped. "They told our families they'd build schools and clinics. They gave us land deeds, promised a future." He pointed to a nearby sack. "Ouagadougou Gold Consortium." Beside it, tools sized for children. A pickaxe, barely larger than a spoon. "My sister used that," he said, voice cracking. "She thought she could feed her family. They pay her nothing." He choked on rage, shame, tears. "They use our people as pawns." Traoré looked again at the tiny pick, then back to the guard. He spotted a patch on the man's sleeve, faded, half-torn. A mining task force emblem, one he remembered from geology school before power and politics claimed him. Dusty lecture halls, dreams of prosperity, all poisoned now. "You knew," Traoré said quietly, "and you stayed." The guard's head dropped. "I needed the job. I thought I could change things from inside." Antoine slammed his fist against the cot. "There's no change from inside," he hissed. "They chain us with lies. My nephew, he crushed his hand against stone until it split. He has 6 fingers now." The nurses paused, glancing at each other in silence, and in that silence Traoré understood. This was not just about mines or gold or justice. This was about reclaiming the soul of a people, and he would not let it be buried again. Traoré raised his hand, and the tent fell silent. He rose slowly, helmet in one hand, eyes sweeping across the sagging canvas walls, patched with corporate flyers still clinging to their false promises. Opportunity, wealth, a brighter tomorrow. Each slogan was a cruel joke. In the corner, women clutched their children, rocking gently, their faces hollow. Near the rusting cots, little ones huddled in silence, rags wrapped around their bodies, eyes wide and watchful. Traoré's voice, calm but commanding, broke through the stillness. "Antoine, bring me everything, every name, every letter, every lie they sent to families offering hope." Antoine moved quickly to a folding table buried in tattered papers. He rifled through lists, envelopes, government seals smudged by dust and sweat. Behind him, the guard, slumped against a pole, kept his eyes lowered. Traoré stepped toward him. "You'll help us now," he said. "You'll take us through their tunnels. You'll show us the command center." The guard nodded, shame and fear flickering behind his eyes. Antoine returned, hands full of creased documents. "They took entire families," he said, voice trembling. "Told us we'd share in the mine's profits. Told us we'd have schools, clinics, deeds to land." He handed the bundle to Traoré. "Instead," Antoine said, "they took everything." Their eyes met. A silent understanding passed between them, the man who led a nation and the man who risked everything to speak the truth. Traoré folded the papers and slid them into his jacket. He glanced again at the child lying nearby, chest rising and falling under the nurse's steady hand. Then he turned to Antoine. "Tonight we prepare our next move. Legal, public, global. We bring in reporters, human rights observers. No more secrets. The world will see their crimes." Antoine's jaw tightened. A flicker of fire lit behind his eyes. They won't know what hit them, he said. Traoré nodded, helmet under his arm. Outside, the dying light of evening stretched shadows across the floor. Through the open flap, the pit still yawned, women laboring under the weight of stolen dreams. We begin at dawn, he said, and by morning, this ends. Antoine offered a quick, fierce smile before turning to rally nurses and survivors. Traoré watched him go, his heartbeat steady, his purpose clear. The air felt charged, the quiet before a storm. Beyond the tent, hammer blows echoed from the deep, a cruel lullaby of exploitation. But Traoré knew. The human spirit, once awakened, was louder still. Later, the presidential hall loomed, its marble columns bathed in late-afternoon sun. Traoré entered, flanked by Colonel Traoré, legal advisor Rossi, and human rights director Zita. The air was heavy. A long oak table stretched before them, covered in files, photographs, and battered ledgers. Antoine stepped forward and laid down a stack of glossy prints. Women in torn clothing, knee-deep in rust-red tailings. Children, ribs exposed, fingers bleeding. Each photo struck the table like a hammer blow. "These were taken yesterday," Antoine said quietly. "Southern shaft. Forced to work through midnight, no food, no rest." Zita picked up a photo. A woman, her eyes dark with exhaustion, cradled a limp child's hand, her lips pressed into a line. She flipped through more images, baskets, swollen feet, company logos stamped on sacks like brands. Rossi leaned forward, opening a ledger. "Budget records show millions diverted from the rural fund," he said. "Filed as infrastructure, traced to shell companies, all foreign-linked." He tapped the paper. "Bribes to local officials in Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso. Some, even in our cabinet." Traoré's jaw tightened, the metals on his chest catching the light like judgment. "They've bought silence at every level," he said. "Even some of our own soldiers looked the other way." The room went still. Traoré leaned in, fingers resting on the marble. His voice was quiet, but sharp as steel. "This isn't just illegal mining, it's an assault on our people's dignity. They use women and children as tools. They steal from our villages. They bribe those sworn to protect us. That ends now." Zita nodded. "I'll coordinate with the UN rapporteur on child labor. We'll publish a report within days. Full documentation. Global exposure." Rossi dipped his pen in ink. "We'll charge under Article 142, forced labor. Article 318, embezzlement of public funds. We'll seek international warrants, but we'll need witness testimony." He looked to Antoine. Antoine straightened. "I've arranged for the women and children to be moved to the central clinic. Zita's team will take sworn statements. We have translators. Their identities will be protected." Silence settled again. This time, it was solemn, the weight of justice rising. Traoré closed his eyes, the memory of the child's scream, the rifle lowered, the guard's trembling hands. He opened his eyes and looked each person in the room in the eye. "Our first duty is to the survivors," he said, "their safety, their healing, their justice. Then we tear this network down, and we rebuild what they tried to steal." No one spoke. No one needed to. The path was set. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the reckoning about to unfold. But soon, the world would know. Traoré squared his shoulders. "I'll deploy a unit to secure the mine's entrance. No one gets in or out without my captain's word." He tapped his chest insignia. "We'll guard the site until the courts assume full control." Zita allowed herself a breath. Her usual sternness softened by relief. "Then tomorrow we hold a press conference. Regional media, international outlets, NGOs, everyone. The world needs to see we're serious." Rossi looked up, his pen catching the light. "I'll finalize the indictments tonight. Once signed, we'll serve them at first light." Antoine nodded, eyes closed for a beat. Each plan felt like a vow, heavy with purpose. Traoré stood and extended his hand. Silence fell. The marble floor gleamed beneath the high lights. Antoine took the offered hand. Their handshake was quiet, but in that moment, more binding than any oath. The disguised president and the local witness united in justice. Outside, thunder rolled across distant hills. The storm was coming, and it carried accountability. Traoré ducked beneath a jagged overhang. His heart pounded in his chest as he clicked on the folding lamp. A weak beam cut through the black, revealing a tunnel damp with sweat and dust. "Stay close," Antoine whispered beside him. "Follow me." Traoré tugged his threadbare foreman's cap low, collar tight against his neck, sleeves rolled. His arms, smeared with red clay, blended with the grime of the workers. Each breath was deliberate, each step a quiet oath. The tunnel opened into a dim cavern. Lamps swung above like trembling stars. Shadows danced on the walls. Children crouched at troughs, grinding ore with wooden sledges. Their voices rose like a whispering prayer. "Give us strength. Give us mercy. Give us water." Traoré's chest tightened. A girl, barely 10, bowed her head to the stone, tears carving paths through the dust on her face. A deputy guard stepped from the gloom, lantern raised. He froze at the sight of Traoré, eyes narrowing beneath the brim. Traoré held still, every muscle locked. Recognition flickered. The guard cleared his throat. "Foreman, they need you at the east shaft." Antoine's hand found Traoré's elbow. "Keep moving," he whispered. They passed boys with wrapped arms, too injured to work, their hollow gazes flicking up. One mouthed a word. "Help." Traoré said nothing, but each step was a vow. Antoine led him to a crude wooden shack wedged into the rock. A desk, a single swinging lamp. A place where orders were made and hope was buried. Traoré perched on a crate, wood groaning under his weight. He pulled a camera from his pocket and positioned it quietly. "This is where they process the shipments," he muttered. Antoine knelt beside a girl at the trough. "What's your name?" She blinked, startled. "Mariam," she whispered. Antoine handed her a clean handkerchief and a small cup of water. Her hands trembled as she drank. Then she leaned into his side, sleep already overtaking her. Traoré clenched his jaw. These weren't victims on a ledger. These were lives, stolen in plain sight. The deputy returned. "Foreman," he said, "the supervisors want to know why shipments are late." Traoré stood, adjusting his shirt. "Contamination issues. I'm handling it." The guard hesitated, nodded, and left. Respect and a flicker of unease in his gaze. Antoine turned, holding out a battered ledger, pages stiff with mud. "They're real quotas, inflated reports, fabricated data." Traoré took it, fingers brushing Antoine's in silent solidarity. He clicked on the camera light, capturing everything. The bent backs, blistered hands, eyes still clinging to hope. They retraced their steps, lamps swayed behind them, casting moving shadows. Mariam watched them go, eyes wide. Was he a rescuer or a ghost? At the tunnel's mouth, sunlight blazed like a rebirth. Traoré lifted his cap, letting the light catch his face. Antoine exhaled beside him. Together they climbed into the waiting convoy. Engines rumbled. Above ground, justice stirred. Traoré allowed himself the smallest smile. Tomorrow, they'd strike harder, and this time, there would be nowhere left to hide. Later, Traoré, Antoine, and a small team crept into a hidden alcove carved from rock. The space was tight, walls glowing orange under the lamp's circle. 3 women waited inside. Marama sat with her daughter's hand in hers. Fatou rocked gently by the wall. Aisha sat upright on a crate, fingers laced, eyes flickering with memory. Traoré switched on his recorder. The soft blink of the red light bathed the room. Antoine moved to Marama's side. She began, voice quiet but unflinching. "I believed them," she said. "They promised schooling for my daughter, a future. Instead, I came here and bled beneath these lamps. Every morning I told myself to hold on one more day, but the children cried at night, and I could not reach them." Her daughter blinked up at Traoré, silent. Marama's voice steadied. "Let the world know. We were not machines. We were mothers, sisters, people." Fatou wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "My husband died last harvest. I had no choice. The mine promised 3 times the wages of a farm. They gave me a sieve and took my youth. They used our hunger as currency, counted our pain as profit." Then Aisha spoke. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said. "I studied by candlelight. I believed I would teach the next generation." She looked at her dust-covered hands. "They gave me a pan instead of a pen, gold instead of books. My dreams sifted away like dirt through my fingers." She raised her chin. "But my spirit didn't break. I remember every lesson. And one day, I will teach again." The room was quiet, heavy with truth. Traoré nodded slowly. He looked at Antoine. "We start with their voices," he said, "and we build from there." Outside, the wind howled through the shaft like an omen, but deep inside the mine, a different sound now echoed: hope, awakening. Traoré watched in silence, the weight of their confessions settling heavily in his chest. When Aisha finished, he leaned forward, speaking gently into the phone recorder. "Thank you. Your courage will light the way." He tapped the stop button, sealing their testimony. Antoine, eyes shimmering with unshed tears, silently reached for the water jug. He filled a cup and offered it, first to Fatou, then Aisha, then Marama's daughter. Each woman drank with trembling hands, their shared endurance filling the air like breath after drowning. Traoré rose. He stepped toward Marama, setting the phone aside and lowering himself to one knee. His eyes met hers. "Your voices will echo far beyond these walls," he said. "I'll carry your stories to every corner of this nation and beyond. Justice is coming." Marama nodded, a single tear carving a clean path through the dust on her cheek. Fatou let out a long breath, her shoulders softening. Aisha's gaze lifted toward the darkened tunnel behind them, as if, in her mind, the path forward had already begun to form. The distant clatter of shovels reminded Traoré of the time slipping away. He turned the recorder back on for one last message. "To those listening," he said, his voice steady and calm, "these women speak not out of vengeance, but out of hope. Their strength will guide us. We will not fail them." He slipped the phone back into his coat pocket, their voices now embedded in the seams of his mission. Antoine stood and offered his arm to each woman in turn. Together they moved toward the alcove's narrow exit, slowly, but with renewed purpose. Traoré lingered for one final glance. The lamps swayed above like fragile constellations in the mine's darkness. As they stepped into the main tunnel, the scent of clay and sweat returned, but it no longer suffocated. It felt like the scent of something being undone. High above, the convoy waited, its engines cold, its cargo precious. Traoré climbed aboard and Antoine helped the women into the trucks, ensuring each one was safe, each voice recorded, each truth preserved. As the convoy rumbled to life and pulled into the dusk, Traoré stared at the mine's shadowed mouth, now filled with the force of truth. The voices of Marama, Fatou, and Aisha followed him, not as echoes, but as vows. He would not let them fade. Earlier, the hidden alcove had been little more than a scar in the mine's side, barely wide enough to hold 5 people. The lamp's amber glow danced on the rock walls as the 3 women settled into place. Marama cradled her daughter's hand, her eyes lowered. Fatou rocked silently, arms wrapped tight around her knees. Aisha sat upright on a crate, her gaze locked on the pool of water glistening between the stones. Traoré opened his phone, tapped the record button, and held the device in his lap. Its red light blinked softly, waiting. Marama spoke first. Her voice was low but clear. "I came here believing the lies. They promised school for my daughter. I imagined desks, books, a teacher who cared." She looked at her daughter, who was staring blankly at the floor. "Instead, they gave us shovels and said, 'Work or starve.'" Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed strong. "They stole her laughter in exchange for silence, and I want the world to know. They took our dreams before they ever had a chance." A long pause followed. Then Fatou shifted. Her braids slipped forward as she faced the recorder. "My husband died in the fields," she said. "The mine said they'd help us, said they'd build homes. What they built were cages, made of words, not bars." Her voice hardened. "My children worked with raw hands, digging for someone else's fortune. I was desperate, but I didn't surrender. I am still here." She wiped her face roughly, smearing dust with tears. Aisha stood slowly, pressing a hand to the rocky wall for balance. "I was meant to be a teacher," she whispered. "I studied until my eyes burned. I learned to count, to write, to dream." Her voice grew firmer. "But they gave me a sieve and called it opportunity. Still, I never stopped teaching myself. Grammar rules, history dates. I recited them like prayers as I sifted through their dirt." She looked directly at Traoré. "One day, I will return to the front of a classroom." The words hung in the air, sacred and sharp. Traoré knelt before Marama's daughter and offered a cup of water. The girl sipped quietly, the lamp catching her wide eyes. She leaned against her mother, her breathing calmer now. Traoré stood, turned to the phone, and spoke with a quiet finality. "Your voices will be heard. The world will know your names." He tapped the stop button. Antoine knelt beside Fatou, gently pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. Their silent partnership in that moment needed no words. It was built on shared urgency and moral clarity. Beyond the alcove, the mine still groaned. Shovels struck stone, metal rang out. But in this space, something had shifted. Traoré placed a hand on Marama's shoulder. "You will see change," he promised. "I swear to you, we will rebuild what they tried to erase." She nodded, barely above a whisper, but with a strength that cracked the silence. Antoine helped her to her feet, her child in her arms. Fatou and Aisha followed. Traoré stepped aside, letting the women pass first, letting them lead the way out. As they emerged into the corridor, the tunnel's dim light washed over them like dawn breaking underground. They were no longer victims. They were witnesses. Back above ground, the convoy rumbled toward the capital. In Traoré's pocket, their voices pulsed like a heartbeat against his chest. Beside him, Antoine placed a firm hand on his arm. Dust billowed behind the trucks like a banner of change. Traoré looked once more toward the mine's gaping mouth, and in the rearview mirror of memory, he carried the voices of the women, unbroken, unbent, and finally believed. "Our president walks among us, not from behind barricades or tinted glass, but as one of us," Antoine called out, his voice steady, pulling the city square into a breathless hush. Then, lower now, almost intimate, he added, "Traoré stood between a child and a loaded rifle. He heard your cries from the depths of the mine. Now, we raise those voices to the heights of power." The crowd erupted. Homemade signs lifted high into the sky like fists made of hope. From the edge of the gathering, corporate envoys, foreign suits with slick grins and panicked eyes, scrambled toward cameras. A Euro Gold spokesman, his jacket wrinkled and smile forced, tried to offer rehearsed statements about investment and partnership, but his words vanished beneath chants. No more exploitation. Burkina Faso for Burkina Bay. A financier from Global Mining Investments took the mic next, mumbling about safety protocols and community engagement. His speech met only stone-faced silence, broken by the chants of schoolchildren perched on their parents' shoulders. We want school, not gold. Mothers surged forward, fists not raised in anger alone, but in defiance, dignity, and reclamation. High above, on the broad marble balcony of the presidential palace, Traoré stood motionless. Behind him, the national flag rippled in the wind, its golden sun defiant against red and green. He wore a plain miner's shirt under his tailored jacket, a silent testimony, a reminder, a signal. He scanned the crowd. Elderly veterans, their white hair catching the sun, held placards that read, "Freedom was born in blood, we remember." Teenagers, hardened by instability, chanted with voices hoarse and unshaken. In their unity, Traoré felt something stronger than pride. It was the heartbeat of a people realizing their own power. Down in the courtyard, aides shuffled last-minute declarations, press secretaries whispered reminders, and satellite vans beamed anticipation across continents. But Traoré's eyes remained locked on the sea of faces. Not an audience, not citizens, not subjects, his people. At noon, he stepped forward. The square went silent. The drums stopped. Even the wind seemed to pause. Traoré unfolded a single sheet of paper. His voice, deep and measured, carried across rooftops. Today, he began, we honor not just the truth, but the people who carried it from darkness into light. He promised reparations to those wronged. He declared every mine in Burkina Faso would now fall under transparent, independent oversight, that profits would build schools, clinics, and cooperatives, not line the pockets of faceless men, that child labor, exploitation, and bribery would no longer find sanctuary behind foreign logos or local silence. And let it be known, he said, his voice rising like thunder, those who profited from our children's suffering will be prosecuted, with the full force of our law and the fire of our conscience. The declaration landed like a drumbeat carved into stone. The crowd erupted. Tears fell, horns blared, drums thundered. People danced in the streets, wrapped in flags, wrapped in one another. Joy spilled over the square like water after drought. Antoine turned from the balcony's edge and gripped Traoré's forearm. Their handshake, silent, steady, sealed more than a speech. It confirmed a revolution that would not fade with the sun. They had turned outrage into action, and a nation had found its voice. Later, inside the high tribunal, Traoré entered the marble chamber beside Colonel Cabore, Zita, and Rossi. The air was thick with formality, pressed suits, quiet murmurs, the cold gleam of polished wood. On the opposing bench, the Eurogold legal team lounged with the smug confidence of men who thought they still owned the game. Traoré took his seat at the plaintiff's table. In the gallery, journalists leaned forward. Families of survivors gripped the railing, waiting. Rossi stood and placed a stack of flash drives before the judge. Your Honor, we submit unedited footage recorded on June 10th by President Traoré's investigative team, inside the Eurogold site. A nod from the bench. The screen lit up. Children driven into mine shafts by armed men. Women staggering beneath sacks of ore. Babies asleep in corners of dirt and dust. A wave of silence broke into whispers. The Eurogold lead attorney, Marcel Delacroix, stood quickly. Objection, these are unverified, circumstantial. Gavel strike. The judge's voice was iron. Admitted as demonstrative material. Rossi wasted no time. These guards are Euro Gold employees. Their names appear on this payroll. He clicked again. Screens filled with ledgers, account logs, bank transfers to shell companies, all tied back to Euro Gold and global mining investments. Antoine stepped forward with a printed ledger. These entries refer to labor quotas, he said. See the labels. Night shift children, female tailings crew. That's what they called them. The courtroom gasped. Delacroix rose again, face tight. Forgery. Fabrication. We demand verification. Zita stood smoothly and laid digital certificates before the judge. Each file is digitally signed, chain of custody intact, every document traceable to the National Archive. The murmurs now turned against the defense. Delacroix's jaw twitched as he sank into his chair, hands knotted beneath the table. Then, the moment no one breathed for. A bailiff stepped forward and called her name. Marama. She entered slowly, pausing under the glare. The courtroom hushed. Rossi stepped forward. Marama, he said gently, please tell the court what you saw. She looked to the judge, to the audience, to the president seated across the room. And then she spoke. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling at first. They told us we'd be educated, fed, lifted out of poverty, she began. But instead, they made us machines. I watched my daughter's hands bleed, and no one showed mercy until President Traoré came. Her gaze snapped to the defense table where the European lawyers now looked visibly shaken. Monsieur Delacroix shot to his feet, his tone sharp. Is it not true, madam, that you received compensation, monthly payments for your work? Marama didn't flinch. They handed us scraps, not salaries. My daughter's allowance bought stale bread. No school, no medicine, just blisters and empty promises. The courtroom fell into a stunned hush. Rossi approached the bench with a new file. These are the medical records, Your Honor. Children treated for broken bones, severe malnutrition, infections, all from clinics adjacent to the mine. He placed them before the judge, who leafed through each document with grave deliberation. Then, the judge turned to the defense. Well, monsieur? The once composed Delacroix hesitated, the smug confidence drained from his face. We dispute the characterization, he muttered. Our client regrets any unintended consequences, but denies systematic wrongdoing. Traoré met his gaze, calm, unflinching. The judge tapped his pen against the bench. Tomorrow, we will proceed with a full hearing on liability. Effective immediately, all Eurogold assets within Burkina Faso are frozen. Gasps echoed through the room. Security officials moved swiftly to enforce the ruling, sealing financial records and halting operations. Outside, reporters surged forward in a frenzy, flashbulbs lighting up the courtyard like midday lightning. Traoré emerged from the chamber with Zita, Colonel Cabore, and Rossi by his side. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and coming rain. Antoine rushed forward, clasping Traoré's hand in a firm grip. Their eyes locked in a silent acknowledgement. The stolen voices had now become part of the country's truth. They had turned a courtroom, once a fortress of power, into a sanctuary of justice. The next morning, the courtroom was packed wall to wall. Cameras lined the rear, beaming the verdict to every corner of the nation. The judge raised his gavel. In the matter of the people of Burkina Faso versus Eurogold consortium, he declared, this court finds the defendants guilty. The silence broke into stunned murmurs. Reparations shall be paid to all identified victims. The mine is hereby shut down, effective immediately. Criminal charges will proceed against Eurogold's board for forced labor, child endangerment, and the embezzlement of state funds. The defense bench was still. Monsieur Delacroix sat rigid, lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came. He stood slowly, his pristine suit now hanging heavy with the burden of guilt. As he exited, the echo of his footsteps seemed to mark the end of an era. In the courtyard, reporters crowded toward the palace gates. Traoré stepped to the microphones. His voice was steady and resolute. This verdict confirms what we have always known. Burkina Faso belongs to its people, not to foreign shareholders, not to exploiters hiding behind polished contracts. He paused, letting the words settle. This mine will be reborn under local control. Every gram of gold will go toward education, toward clinics, toward the lives that were once discarded. Antoine stood nearby, shepherding survivors into waiting vans. Many wore hospital blankets, others held each other close. Yet their eyes were clear now, no longer shadows of grief, but windows of resilience. One journalist leaned forward. "Mr. President, what would you say to those who claim this is just the beginning?" Traoré offered a quiet, steady smile. "I say they're right. Today was justice. Tomorrow, we build dignity." Behind him, the national flag rippled above the palace. Its golden sun blazed down on the square as if blessing a new chapter. The crowd began to drift home. Some still waved banners. Justice served, no more chains, the people first. Traoré lingered at the steps. Marama approached, eyes glistening. She wrapped her arms around him and pressed her forehead to his shoulder. He embraced her in return, the warmth of her gratitude rising through him like fire. Antoine handed him a glass of water. Their eyes met in mutual understanding. No words passed. None were needed. The convoy to the mines would return, but this time with architects, doctors, and teachers. The empire of silence had crumbled. Now came the long, careful work of healing. His bespoke suit was flawless, except for a single crease near the lapel, the only sign of a man hurried under armed escort. Philippe Durand's shoulders sagged under the burden of the moment. His steps were slow, unsteady. He kept his head down, eyes fixed on the polished stones beneath his feet, as if hoping to vanish into them. Antoine stood quietly beside Traoré, his hand resting lightly on the president's back. Neither man spoke. The silence that enveloped the courtyard was so profound, even a distant bird call rang out like thunder. Durand stopped 10 paces away and fell to one knee. The crunch of gravel under his polished shoes echoed with finality. From inside his jacket he pulled a crisp sheath of papers, ink still fresh, and held them out with trembling fingers. His voice cracked. "Mr. President, I ask your forgiveness. These are my words, my confession, my vow to make amends." Traoré did not move. The sun glinted off the helmet he held under one arm. His gaze remained steady and unreadable. Durand hesitated, then raised his eyes. They were rimmed red, raw from sleepless nights or tears long held at bay. He offered the papers with both hands. The confession laid everything bare: orders to deploy child labor, bribes to silence whistleblowers, offshore accounts funneling millions that should have gone to clinics, schools, and rural hospitals. At the bottom, Durand's signature looped like a knot tied in final surrender. "I believed profit was power," he said, his voice thin. "I was wrong. I broke lives. I can't undo the damage, but I will spend what's left of my life repairing it." Traoré took the papers but said nothing. Instead, he placed a hand on Durand's shoulder and gently guided him to rise, a simple gesture that carried the full weight of acknowledgement. No grand words, just quiet recognition of remorse. Durand stood, brushing dust from his knee. Antoine stepped forward and handed him a small bound book. "These are the names," Antoine said. "The testimonies. You will oversee every restitution, every medical bill, every school fund, every home rebuild. Personally." The words fell like iron. Durand nodded. His pride was gone, replaced by something firmer: accountability. Still, silence held the air tight as the two men faced each other. Traoré tucked the confession to his chest. Durand bowed his head, lips moving in a silent vow. Nearby, journalists leaned forward waiting for a statement, a line, a headline. Traoré gave none. Instead, he gestured toward the palace steps where survivors stood gathered. Durand turned and walked to them slowly, sweat soaking through his collar. Marama, Fatou, and Aisha stepped out from the line. One by one, he knelt before them and presented the restitution binder. "I cannot erase the past," he said, "but I will help build your future." No declarations, no spectacle, just the soft cadence of repentance meeting quiet resolve. From a few paces back, Traoré watched. He stood tall, still and dignified. As Durand concluded his quiet pledges, he looked back for direction. The president offered a single firm nod. At once, guards stepped forward to unseal the secured containers, chests of reparations, funds earmarked for survivors. Engineers rolled trucks into position, each marked with the national seal, loaded with supplies for schools, clinics, and clean water systems. Activists from human rights organizations flanked the convoy, notebooks in hand, prepared to track every resource. When the first trucks rumbled down the road, Durand lingered a moment longer, hands clasped, eyes on Traoré. Their final glance exchanged no victory, no forgiveness, only understanding. Dignity had returned in silence. Durand turned and walked toward his waiting SUV, now escorted by guards who no longer wore expressions of suspicion, but of solemn trust. Traoré remained on the marble steps. He opened a ceremonial chest and placed the signed confession inside, a symbol that the truth had been laid bare, and justice at last served. He turned and called the survivors to his side. They gathered close, not cheering, but breathing in the relief of closure. In their faces he saw not triumph, but something deeper, an unshaken resolve. Later that morning, Traoré stood at the edge of the old shaft, now bathed in sunrise. The mine, once filled with cries and chains, now buzzed with the rhythm of restoration. Engineers in orange vests moved briskly, guiding teams of liberated workers. The hum of machines, once agents of oppression, now sang of rebirth. Traoré wore the same foreman's cap he'd donned in secret weeks ago. He surveyed the transformed site. Conveyor belts were fitted with safety guards. Sunlight poured across wide, open workstations. No shadows, no whips, no secrets. Antoine mounted the lead tractor of a line bearing the seal, Cooperative for Burkina's Future. He fired the engine, and the convoy rolled forward, stirring red dust that glittered like gold in the light. Children lined the path, faces lit with wonder. Some waved hand-painted flags. Others held sketchbooks filled with drawings of dream schools and clinics. As the convoy passed, they chanted, "Rebirth! Rebirth!" Antoine waved back, tears in his eyes. Traoré continued on foot, walking the dirt paths until he reached a shaded platform. There, women gathered, not in chains, but in circles of learning. Marama stood in front of a chalkboard, teaching young mothers to write their names. Fatou sat nearby, weaving baskets and showing others the craft. Each woman had become both student and teacher, rebuilding dignity with every word, every thread. Traoré nodded to Marama. She smiled and returned to her lesson, chalk clicking softly against the board. Ahead, blueprints were being unfurled, plans for a vocational school, a clinic, a clean water station. The very stones that once bore cruelty were being transformed into foundations of hope. He turned to Adama, an engineer, who traced reinforced beams made from salvaged conveyor supports. "Every scar here can hold weight," he said, "if we build with intention." Traoré looked around at the faces, children laughing, mothers learning, laborers reclaiming their time. The mine hadn't just been reclaimed, it had been reborn. This was the new gold: education, health, freedom, and memory. And this time, no one would dare to bury it underground. At the mouth of the shaft, a ceremonial shovel struck the earth, splitting the red soil like a promise made real. Traoré and Antoine lifted it together, raising the first clump of earth high as the crowd erupted in cheers. Behind them, freed children held a long banner painted in bold strokes, "From darkness to light." Their laughter rang out across the valley like the peal of church bells, each voice a hymn to survival. Dust floated in sunbeams like golden ash, and in the loosened earth, veins of quartz shimmered faintly, proof that beauty and worth could still be reclaimed from even the deepest wounds. Off to the side, under the shade of a canvas canopy, Aisha led a science workshop. A group of teenage girls leaned over beakers and minerals, experimenting with sedimentation and filtration. Aisha's voice was calm, her smile warm, as the girls peered through magnifying glasses. Where once there had been fear, now there was fascination. Traoré paused to watch as a girl named Salimata poured cloudy water through a cloth filter. Her eyes widened with wonder as clear liquid streamed through. Aisha placed a hand on her shoulder and said gently, "Even the murkiest water can be made pure, with the right tools and care." Traoré felt something tighten in his chest. The simplicity of that truth struck him like gospel. Nearby, children streamed into classrooms made from refurbished shipping containers, their walls painted in joyful shades of yellow, green, and sky blue. Inside, desks faced chalkboards where numbers and letters welcomed them like long-lost friends. A local teacher named Issa guided their first lesson, tracing his finger across a map of Burkina Faso, connecting villages to the mine with broad arcs. "Ouagadougou to Kaya, Kaya to Yalgo," he said, and eager hands shot into the air, full of questions about rivers, roads, and animals that roamed their land. Outside the window, tractors passed, and Isa smiled, watching renewal roll by in real time. As noon approached, the conveyor belts hummed again, but now they carried bricks, steel beams, and cement instead of ore. At the clinic's construction site, women who once hauled stones now assembled hospital beds, wiring lights, and testing sterile equipment. Amina, a nurse in training, adjusted a newly delivered X-ray machine. Her hands were steady, her eyes bright with purpose. This time, she wasn't there to witness suffering. She was there to prevent it. From the shadow of a supply crate, Traoré watched her and felt pride burn slow and deep within him. Out in the fields, Antoine parked his tractor near a newly planted orchard. Mango and guava saplings lined the rows, their leaves trembling with promise. He knelt, pressing his fingers into the damp soil. These trees would feed families. These fruits would become wages, not offerings to some distant shareholder. Nearby, workers raised beams on a communal kitchen. Solar panels gleamed on its roof, another sign of a village not just surviving, but building smart, sustainable futures. Traoré climbed onto a repurposed haul truck, now converted into a stage. As he raised his hand, the crowd quieted. Faces turned toward him, miners, mothers, children, teachers, hope etched into every eye. His voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Today, we do more than reopen a mine. We rebuild a promise to every man, woman, and child in this land, that we, not some distant power, will shape our destiny. This cooperative belongs to you." The cheer that followed shook the valley to its roots. Children danced in clouds of dust, laughter rising like wind over the mountains. As the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows, Traoré stepped down and walked among his people. He clasped the calloused hands of engineers. He hugged the teachers. He high-fived the children whose futures now stretched wide before them. Antoine joined him, and together they paused at the mine's lip. Cooperative workers carefully loaded baskets of safely extracted ore, no chains, no guards, onto carts bound for local artisans. The scene pulsed with quiet dignity. Traoré felt it in his bones. The mine's true wealth was not in gold, but in the unbreakable spirit of a people reborn. Later, Traoré stepped through the glass doors of the new clinic built on the ridge above the pit. Sunlight spilled across spotless tiles. The walls still carried the scent of fresh paint and fresh hope. Zeta walked beside him, clipboard in hand, her sharp eyes softening as she passed rows of bright, sterile examination rooms. Antoine followed close behind, heart proud. The first sight stopped them in their tracks. Marama sat by a window, cradling her daughter in a vivid cotton wrap. The child's cheeks glowed pink, her eyes alert and curious. A nurse handed her a cup of juice, and she drank with both hands, clumsy and delighted. Yesterday she couldn't lift her head, the nurse whispered. Today she chased the others around the ward. Marama's hand trembled with emotion. Her voice cracked as she looked up. I never thought I'd see her smile again. Traoré stepped forward and gently squeezed her shoulder. This clinic is yours now, yours and every mother who endured. They walked on, passing long rows of children sitting up in beds, playing with donated wooden toys. Laughter bounced off the clean white walls, a sound more healing than any medicine. Zeta paused at a window. This, she said, was our first priority. Care and joy, side by side. Traoré nodded, eyes bright. Farther down the corridor, they entered a room converted into a legal office. Around a long table sat cooperative representatives, faces solemn, shoulders squared with new responsibility. Antoine distributed thick binders. Traoré joined them at the head of the table. Inside the documents were the blueprints for self-governance, charters of incorporation, democratic voting procedures, profit-sharing mechanisms. A lawyer from Rossi's team explained each section clearly. Every member will have a vote, she said, and every gold sale will fund schools, clinics, and clean water projects. Traoré looked at each face in turn, miners, teachers, farmers turned future builders, and saw no trace of hesitation. Outside, the sun blazed over a transformed landscape. Orchards, schools, clinics, and clean water stations, all born from the ashes of exploitation. And under that same sun, a nation took its first true steps, not in fear, but in power, purpose, and peace. A woman seated in the front row raised her hand. What happens if we disagree? She asked. Her voice was quiet but steady. Rossi's deputy leaned forward, answering with calm authority. Disputes will first go to the Cooperative Council, elected by you. If needed, a special tribunal under Burkina Bay law will ensure fairness. The woman nodded slowly. Relief softened the worry in her brow. This was not just policy. It was protection. Then, one by one, the members stepped forward to sign the charter. Each signature wasn't just ink on paper. It was a promise, a vow to themselves, to each other, to the future. Traoré watched in silence. Every name written down felt like the planting of a seed. When the last hand lowered the pen, he stepped forward and clapped once, sharp, resolute. You've given yourselves ownership, he said. Now you hold the future in your hands. Outside, under a wide canopy of acacia trees, villagers from neighboring communities had gathered. They came not just to witness this turning point, but to give thanks. Children once pressed into labor now sat cross-legged on woven mats, their eyes wide with wonder as an educator guided them through a new primer. Letters came to life on the page. A little boy traced the lines of his name with his finger. A girl beamed as she recognized the first letter of hers. On the edge of the group, a young mother leaned into her husband. "This is the school I dreamed of," she whispered. He smiled and gave her hand a squeeze. Back at the clinic, Traoré paused at an open window overlooking the shaft. Where once screams echoed, now medicinal plants grew. Aloe, moringa, lemongrass, sprouting from the wounded earth like offerings of healing. Nurses moved gently between the raised beds, spritzing leaves, plucking herbs, crushing them into soothing salves. The air was fragrant, laced with calm. Traoré took a long breath. "This is more than medicine," he said quietly. Zeta stood beside him. "This is our redemption," she replied. "And it won't end here. It will spread." Not far off, Antoine knelt beside two teenage girls seated in the shade. They had just signed their cooperative membership forms. They told him about their dream, starting a bakery using grains from the cooperative's fields. Their eyes sparkled as they described kneading dough and handing out fresh loaves to neighbors. Antoine grinned. "You won't just feed people," he said. "You'll feed hope." As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the courtyard, Traoré led one last quiet inspection. He visited every ward, every classroom, every signing table. He listened to the sound of laughter, of children playing tag, of women calling to each other from new kitchens, of men discussing harvest plans. These were not just sounds. They were signs of confidence, of life returning. Near the clinic entrance, Marama's daughter toddled toward him and offered him a small wooden train. Traoré accepted it with both hands, placed it gently on a shelf beside a stack of medical records, innocence resting next to responsibility. Then he turned and looked out over the valley. The mine that once rang with pain now buzzed with renewal. Below, water tanks gleamed, orchards stirred, schools hummed. Above, the sky glowed amber, as if the land itself were being blessed. He turned to Zeta and Antoine and said softly, "The wounds run deep. But today, they begin to heal." They stepped together into the cooling twilight, their silhouettes long across the red dust, each step a testament to justice reclaimed and dignity restored. The next morning, the Grand Plaza in Ouagadougou swelled with quiet anticipation. Families gathered beneath the fluttering national flag, its golden sun blazing against red, brighter than ever before. Survivors stood together on a low stage of polished stone. Their faces bore the lines of suffering, but also the poise of strength hard-earned. Marama stepped forward first. Her daughter clung gently to her side. In her hands, she held a worn leather notebook. She opened it slowly and cleared her throat. Then she spoke. "In darkness we were hidden, bones pressed to earth, but dawn found our voices, rising like birdsong over shattered stone." The plaza fell silent. Her words, delicate and powerful, wove through the crowd, through farmers and traders, ministers and mothers, foreign delegates and local elders. No applause followed, not yet, just stillness. Then, one by one, people rose to their feet, not for spectacle, but because they knew. They were witnessing the rebirth of a nation. When Marama finished reading, the plaza erupted. Applause thundered off the surrounding buildings, rising like a wave of gratitude that lifted every heart and washed over the square in sound and spirit. Next came Fatou, her eyes luminous, her steps sure. She wore a dress hand-woven on cooperative looms, its threads echoing resilience. In her hands, a single white flower, an offering of renewal. Her voice rang out, steady and proud. "We gathered our tears and planted them where hatred once thrived. From sorrow's soil bloomed courage, each petal a testament to the unbroken spirit." Children at the plaza's edge pressed their palms together as if in prayer, and a breeze carried her words into the distant city streets. Then came Aisha. Her poem was a celebration of reclaimed knowledge, and her voice danced with joy. "We learned beneath lanterns' glare, counted stars in our dreams. But today we stand in sunlight, our minds alight with promise." As she spoke, faces in the crowd, young and old, black, white, and every shade between, lit with pride, many with tears. When the final word faded, a hush fell, heavier now, thick with emotion. And then Traoré stepped onto the stage. He wore no medals, no spectacle, just a simple suit with sleeves rolled up, a quiet echo of the work he and his people had done. At his side stood Colonel Zeta and Antoine, solemn and steady. Above them, the national flag rippled in the breeze, a living symbol of a nation reborn. Traoré lifted his hand in a brief salute. His voice, when it came, was low, but carried with it the weight of a people's truth. Today we honor every woman who bore her child's pain, every child who whispered prayers in the dark, and every soul who believed that justice would come. You stood when others bowed. You spoke when silence was easier. And you gave this nation a truth that could not be buried. He paused, letting the silence breathe, letting dignity settle in every chest. Let this day mark not only the end of exploitation, he continued, but the beginning of our promise to one another, that every mine, every field, every classroom will serve our people first. We will build schools from stones once mined in darkness. We will heal wounds with the earth that once broke our bodies. And we will govern not for profit, but for the prosperity of every family. Beneath this flag, behind him, cooperative workers unfurled a banner that read, "United for Renewal." From wicker baskets in each corner of the plaza, survivors released white doves. The birds soared skyward, wings flashing against the blue as cheers rose like a tide. Children dashed forward, storming the stage in joy. They wrapped red, yellow, and green scarves around the shoulders of survivors, spontaneous garlands of gratitude. Nearby, traders in open stalls rang bells and beat drums. Their rhythm joined the people's rejoicing. Foreign journalists scribbled notes with wide eyes as cameras captured a nation's triumph. Traoré stepped down from the stage and moved into the crowd. He shook the hands of elders who had endured colonial rule and embraced young activists whose futures pulsed with purpose. Antoine scooped up Marama's daughter and lifted her high above the throng so she could wave to the crowd, her laughter like sunlight. Zeta leaned in close to Fatou, speaking softly about plans for a new women's center. Rossi passed binders to local officials outlining the next phase of cooperative expansion. Around them, the plaza bloomed into a living mural of restoration. Children reciting vowels on portable chalkboards. Women stamping handprints dipped in ink onto a growing mural. Our hands shape our destiny. Men loading crates of mangoes and guavas bound for village markets. Above it all, the flags snapped in the wind, their colors blazing as the sun climbed higher. Light spilled like gold across rooftops and banners, casting the square into a brilliant mosaic of hope. At the center of it all stood Traoré, one hand resting on the shoulder of a mother who had once held her child in terror. He looked up at the flag, then out over the sea of faces, so many now smiling, many still healing, and a small, honest smile spread across his face. This was no decree. This was a country singing in full chorus, not governed, united. The next morning, the palace mailroom overflowed. Zeta scanned a stack of fresh cables, statements from Ghana, Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, each declaring immediate audits of foreign-operated mines under newly passed child protection statutes. In Accra, mining conglomerates paused operations to revise labor protocols under Ghana's new reforms. In Bamako, an emergency summit had been convened to outlaw underage mining across the region. From Nairobi to Johannesburg, labor rights organizations announced fact-finding missions bound for Burkina Faso. And everywhere, the same question echoed. How did you do it? Traoré read the reports in quiet reflection, a hand resting on the wooden train left behind by Marama's daughter. Outside, beyond the arches of the palace, the city stirred. A new day was beginning, and this time it belonged to the people. Each report arrived marked with urgency, a signal of a continental awakening. What began as a reckoning in a dusty pit in Burkina Faso had grown into a seismic shift. The old order of exploitative mining was collapsing under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. Dignity had taken root. By midday, the Ministry of Mines in Ouagadougou had transformed into a diplomatic nerve center. Engineers and human rights observers from 5 nations sat at long tables beneath portraits of former coal magnates turned UN advisors. Laptops hummed, documents passed hand to hand, and behind every conversation pulsed the same question. How did they do it? On one side, African Union officials applauded Burkina Faso's new model: cooperative ownership, transparent profit sharing, and localized governance. On the other, university deans from Pretoria and Lagos unveiled proposals to integrate Traoré's now famous letter into their curriculum, from undergraduate geology lectures to vocational field manuals. The letter, once a private address to his people, now spanned languages and borders. Printed in Swahili, Arabic, Portuguese, and French, it was posted in university halls, pinned to town hall boards, and broadcast by radio across rural villages. Children in remote regions read it aloud beneath solar lanterns, its words seared into the continent's conscience. No mine is worth more than the dignity of a child. And we cannot claim to develop our land if we abandon the people who guard it. In London and Paris, corporate boardrooms issued emergency memos. Human rights officers took seats once reserved for financial strategists. Audits launched. Legal teams scrambled. The language had changed, so had the priorities. Journalists on 3 continents ran comparisons between Burkina Faso's transformation and the unchecked abuses still rampant in other regions. Headlines declared, "Africa's moral compass, the Traoré effect." Online, the movement exploded. Influencers in Tunis and Dar es Salaam launched campaigns like #JusticeMine and #ChildrenFirst. Flash mobs staged silent readings of the letter in crowded markets, distributing copies inside sanitation kits and school books. Across the continent, young voices rose, clear, unyielding. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood on his office balcony, the national flag billowing behind him, a cloth now charged with meaning. Antoine arrived holding a new copy of the letter, freshly printed in Portuguese. "They're launching a lecture series in Luanda," Antoine said. "They want you to speak by video." Traoré nodded, eyes drifting toward the courtyard below, where Marama, Fatou, and Aisha once stood, their voices cracking open the world. He touched the page gently. "Our gold is their lesson," he said. "May it shine for all who listen." By late afternoon, Burkina Faso's foreign ministry was flooded with invitations. UNESCO requested the development of a training module on ethical mining. Delegations from Scandinavia and East Asia sought to fund scholarships and study exchanges. A consortium of global NGOs commissioned Zeta and Rossi to curate a traveling exhibit, photographs, artifacts, and survivor testimonies to tour from Cairo to Cape Town. Every message bore the same refrain: "We must learn from your example." That evening, the ministry's grand hall glowed with possibility. A screen displayed video messages from chancellors and reformers, pledging support, restructuring curriculums, allocating funds. The African Development Bank announced seed capital for cooperative startups modeled on the Burkina Faso blueprint. Engineers in Dar sketched plans to convert abandoned mines into solar farms. Traoré stood in the quiet as those final pledges played, the glow from the screen painting his silhouette. Beside him, Antoine said nothing. No words were needed. The message had spread. The work had begun. What started in one mine had become a continent's call to conscience. The next morning, the sun rose over a different kind of site, no longer a place of exploitation, but one of remembrance and rebirth. At the edge of the old shaft now stood the Memorial Museum of Hope. A wide stone plaza, smooth with polished flagstones, led to a sweeping concrete wall etched with hundreds of names. Women and children once lost to the shadows of forced labor. Traoré stepped forward in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled as always. In his hand, a wooden plaque, small and worn, embossed with a single golden handprint. Around him stood survivors, students in brightly colored uniforms, and villagers from every province. With solemn care, Traoré pressed the plaque to the wall at eye level. It belonged to Marama's daughter, now 12, whose voice, once trembling in a courtroom, had sparked a national reckoning. She stepped beside him and laid her hand over the print. Her fingers fit perfectly into its golden outline. The crowd exhaled together, not in mourning, but in pride. Inside, sunlight filtered through a glass atrium, illuminating the museum's exhibits. Photographs of lined faces and dirt-caked palms, worn tools suspended like artifacts of a fallen regime, softly glowing lanterns above each display. Children from the School of Geology now served as guides. They pointed out veins of quartz and mica once mined in silence, now studied in safety. Every display bore a plaque, knowledge from suffering, dignity in stone, justice remembered. Outside, above the shaft, wind stirred the flag. Inside, among the light and memory, a nation stood transformed, not only in law, but in soul. Traoré followed the students into the research wing, a sunlit, high-ceilinged space where glass cases displayed rare minerals beside handwritten notes from the children who studied them. Each exhibit was a dialogue between discovery and healing. At one workbench, Antoine stood beside a group of young, lab-coated students as they peered through microscopes. A boy, no older than 12, looked up with shining eyes. "Polarized light," he said proudly, "shows the true composition." His fingers moved gracefully across the calibration tools, test tubes, tweezers, slides, as if science itself had become a second language. Traoré watched him speak, warmth rising in his chest. This was no longer just a classroom, it was a reclamation. In an adjoining gallery, Fatou and Aisha stood in front of a collection of artisan jewelry crafted from ethically sourced gold. Under soft spotlights, bracelets, earrings, and pendants gleamed, not with wealth, but with meaning. Each piece bore the maker's mark. Fatou's design, an intricate lattice symbolizing unity, hung beside Aisha's necklace, engraved with the words, "Light from Darkness." Visitors admired the artistry, unaware that proceeds from every sale funded scholarships for children from mining-impacted regions. Traoré paused, nodding to the artisans. Here, art was no longer an escape. It was a language of memory, dignity, and renewal. Outside, the museum grounds buzzed with life. Families picnicked on terraced lawns, children darted between patches of baobab seedlings, planted from seeds recovered at the mine's entrance. The old conveyor paths had been transformed into walking trails, each marked with a brass plaque, "Discovery of atrocity, the people rise, restoration begins." Visitors stopped at each, reading the story of a nation's rebirth told not in stone but in sweat, sacrifice, and solidarity. Traoré climbed the granite steps to a raised overlook, the same place where he once sealed the mine's gates. Now, below him, the old shaft was filled with reflecting pools. Floating platforms drifted gently across the water, their polished surfaces catching the afternoon sun. At dusk, families would release lanterns across the pools, symbols of lives mourned and dreams reclaimed. But for now, the sun danced across the water like fire on glass. Behind him, a student choir gathered on the plaza steps, their uniforms bright, their faces solemn. As they began to sing the national anthem, their voices rose, pure and strong, lifting through the silence. Notes of hope threaded through the plaza, echoing off stone and sky alike. When the final chord faded, Traoré stepped forward. He lifted a hand in quiet salute, then spoke. "This museum is not a monument to our pain," he began, voice low but sure. "It is a promise of what we become when we remember, when we rebuild, when we rise together." He gestured to the gold plaque bearing Marama's daughter's handprint. "This gold shines for her, but our true treasure is here, in every curious mind, every healing hand, every heart willing to stand for what's right." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd like a hush before rainfall. Let Burkina Faso be more than a nation marked by suffering. Let it be a beacon, a call to all who seek to turn injustice into justice, silence into knowledge, and sorrow into light. He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the sun cast its last rays over distant mountains, peaks glowing gold against the sky. The applause swelled, not loud but steady, full of reverence. Traoré did not speak again. He simply placed a hand over his heart and stepped back into the crowd, joining the circle of survivors, students, and citizens who now carried the story forward. As dusk deepened, the first lanterns were placed on the water, and the stars blinked to life overhead. Families lingered, their voices soft with laughter and memory. And in that light, lanterns on water, stars above, a simple truth burned clear. A legacy built on justice and light would never again fade into darkness.